Savakatamritam tapta jivanam kavibireditam kalmashapaham Shravanamangalam Shrimadatatam Bhuvanirnantiye Burida Janaha. The nectar of your words, the praise of poet-seers, elixir to parched souls, delight to listening ears, cleanser of all sins, is great and glorious. They who spread it far and wide on earth are most generous. Good evening, friends. Today we will continue from where we left off last week from the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We are on page 123, 2/3 of the way down the page. So at the moment, Narendra and M are sitting with the Master. And that's who is being referred to in this sentence. As they sat there, the Master looked at them with evident delight. He then began to talk with them. Narendra asked about spiritual discipline. Master, Bhakti, love of God, is the essence of all spiritual discipline. Through love, one acquires renunciation and discrimination naturally. Narendra, isn't it true that the Tantra prescribes spiritual discipline in the company of woman? Master, that is not desirable. It is a very difficult path and often causes the aspirant's downfall. There are 3 such kinds of discipline. One may regard woman as one's mistress. In this case, when he mentions woman, he's talking about looking on God as the Divine Mother. So we can regard the Divine Mother as one's mistress, or look on oneself as her handmaid, or as her child. I look on woman, or the Divine Mother, as my mother. To look on oneself as her handmaid is also good, but it is extremely difficult to practice spiritual discipline looking on woman as the Divine Mother, as one's mistress. To regard oneself as her child is a very pure attitude. In this spiritual discipline, when we look on the Divine Mother, or on, it's not just woman, when we look on all beings as Divine Mother, as being inherent in them, then we are, if we are following one of these disciplines, like looking on her as one's mistress, or one's handmaid, or as her child, we try to think of the Divine Mother being in that person whom we are serving, whether that person is male, female, a child, or whatever, or any creature, any animal. So you're trying to think that the Divine Mother is present in all beings, but your mental attitude to the Divine Mother will be looking on her as where you are her handmaid, or you are her child. And so, or as a mistress. But here Ramakrishna is cautioning us when we look on Divine Mother, or because on one hand, it's supposed to be a mental attitude, but because of our past impressions and conditioning and our habits, we may be tempted by the female form, and so it's considered a in that sense, it could be the downfall for a spiritual aspirant. So the preferred method is to try to look on the Divine Mother with the attitude of you being the handmaid of God, or that you are the child of God, as a Divine Mother present in all beings. And Sri Ramakrishna then says that he himself looks on God as a Divine Mother, as his mother, and he is her child. So there is no feeling of lust or attachments. So it's considered a pure sense, a pure attitude. And when you have that look on God as the handmaid, or as you are the child of God, he says earlier that through such love, one acquires renunciation and discrimination naturally. Well, it's because all your love and attachment is now being focused on you serving God as the handmaid or as a child, and you don't want anything else. So everything else seems insipid. It can't satisfy you the way having this form of love toward God. Just several times you'll hear Sri Ramakrishna will tell a story to illustrate the strength of love that a child has for its mother. And when the child is finished playing with its toys and is being distracted, all they can think about next is, where's my mother? Will start crying. So with that attitude, also when we get tired of all our distractions, all our playthings, and all the suffering we've gone through, then it is time for us to cry as a child would for its mother. And when we do that, naturally we are not attached to other things, and we also discriminate between what is beneficial or not beneficial to our spiritual life, or we see the transitoriness of life, but our mother means more to us than these transitory things of this world. So our attachment to those things drops off. So developing that kind of a love and attachment toward God is what he means when he says, well, then we naturally acquire renunciation, and we also acquire discrimination between what we really want. We really want to love God, we really want our mother. Now, as they were sitting here, Ramakrishna was informed previously that some devotees had arrived and were waiting to see him. So the sannyasis belonging to the sect of Nanak entered the room and greeted the master, saying, Namo Narayana. That's a traditional greeting that sannyasis give to each other, and it just means salutations to God. And then Sri Ramakrishna asked them to sit down. Now the master resumes the conversation. He says, nothing is impossible for God. Nobody can describe his nature in words. Everything is possible for him. There lived at a certain place 2 yogis who were practicing spiritual discipline. The sage Narada was passing that way one day. Realizing who he was, one of the yogis said, have you just come from God himself? What is he doing now? Narada replied, why, I saw him making camels and elephants pass and repass through the eye of a needle. At this, the yogi said, is that anything to wonder at? Everything is possible for God. But the other yogi said, what? Making elephants pass through the eye of a needle? Is that ever possible? You have never been to the Lord's dwelling place. Well, that's a story. I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but apparently yogis are at different stages of uh, what they believe God is capable of. And it's all based on the experience of the yogi. So at 9 o'clock in the morning, while the master was still sitting in his room, Manu Mohan arrived from Kanagar with some members of his family. In answer to Sri Ramakrishna's kind inquiries, Manu Mohan explained that he was taking them to Calcutta. The master said, "Today is the first day of the Bengali month, an inauspicious day for undertaking a journey. I hope everything will be well with you." With a smile, he began to talk of other matters. Now, you'll find in Hinduism that, or maybe it's more of a cultural thing, that certain days are auspicious and certain days are inauspicious for certain events. And traveling, the best day to travel is one of them. Now here we have Sri Ramakrishna talking about an auspicious day for traveling, but other times he says there's no special day, you just chant the name of the Lord and go. So it depends on who he's talking to, I suppose. If that person believes that he should be traveling only on an auspicious day, then he might mention that. But here, Manu Mohan may have known that it was an inauspicious day, but it was a more convenient day to travel. So it kind of depends. On one hand, Sri Ramakrishna tried to follow the traditions of the times, and at other times he didn't want to be burdened by the superstitions, so those things. So when Swami Vivekananda would introduce Hinduism to the West, he did not want to bring this aspect of Hinduism, the Western culture, where, okay, well, in Hinduism they travel on certain days, so he didn't want to present that form of Hinduism to the West, because then that would be superstition, because we wouldn't know, well, what's the background behind that, and is it relevant to us? So in today's world, it's not really relevant. Perhaps it had some meaning in the past, but at this point, the meaning is kind of lost to us. So he began to talk to them on other matters. When Narendra and his friends had finished bathing in the Ganges, the master said to them earnestly, "Go to the Panchavati and meditate there under the banyan tree. Shall I give you something to sit on?" Sri Ramakrishna often would suggest that his young disciples practice at the Panchavati. It's a grove of 5 trees that he had planted and done his spiritual practices in that area. So it's usually considered very auspicious and beneficial to practice spiritual discipline and meditation in a place where others have practiced intense spiritual discipline, because the spiritual atmosphere in that space is considered beneficial and helpful in the spiritual practice of those present. So it would be considered an additional aid to their spiritual practices. About 10:30, Narendra and his Brahmo friends were meditating in the Panchavati. After a while, Sri Ramakrishna came to them. M2 was present. The master said to the Brahmo devotees, "In meditation, one must be absorbed in God. By merely floating on the surface of the water, can you reach the gems lying at the bottom of the sea? Well, Ramakrishna would have only mentioned this if he felt or if he understood that the Brahma devotees were not particularly deep in their meditation, even though they were in a place that could assist them in meditation. Perhaps they did not take the meditation seriously enough. Perhaps they did not have enough training, but anyway, he's just reassuring them that they must dive deeper in their meditation. In other words, let go of more of their attachments and think more of God. So he's just reminding them of that. But he then sings a song. I will not go through the song, but the song is about Mother Kali and look on God as the Divine Mother. So Narendra and his friends came down from their seats on the raised platform of the Panchavati. So there was in the Panchavati is a banyan tree, and it's typical that they will build either made of concrete or some kind of form around the base of the tree so that people can sit there for meditation and spiritual practices. So earlier I mentioned that Ramakrishna asked them if they want a seat, or that means just a cushion to sit on the harder surface. So Narendra and his friends came down from their seats on the raised platform of the Panchavati and stood near the master. He returned to his room with them. The master continued. Now this is, the sentence he's about to mention was one of the verses in the song. When you plunge, the master continued, and he's quoting, when you plunge in the water of the ocean, you may be attacked by alligators, but they won't touch you if your body is smeared with turmeric. There are no doubt 6 alligators, lust, anger, avarice, and so on within you. In the heart's fathomless depths, which is a phrase that was in the song. So I guess alligators don't like Indian food. They don't like turmeric. So I guess that if you smear your body with turmeric, it's considered, I guess it's a practice if you want to go swimming, and it does keep the alligators away. But what does he mean by the alligators? Well, he's referring to the 6 passions. So he's mentioning here lust, anger, avarice. Avarice is just means extreme greed for wealth or material gain. And then there's just a blank, and so on. So what he's leaving out is anger, he's got lust, anger, avarice, delusion, pride, and envy. So these are the 6 passions, and these 6 passions go very deep into our psyche. That's why he says, in the heart's fathomless depths. That means they're totally ingrained in us, and it is our job to protect ourselves from these passions. So protect yourself with a turmeric of discrimination and renunciation, and they won't touch you. This is the discrimination and renunciation based on what we discussed earlier by developing love of God, looking on God as the Divine Mother. In other words, to generate bhakti yoga, love of God as bhakti. So he's still continuing on the same trend of discussion. But then he says, what can you achieve by mere lecturing and scholarship without discrimination and dispassion? God alone is real and all else is unreal. God alone is substance and all else is non-entity. That is discrimination. So when we look out at the world, we see all kinds of different objects. But to prevent our attachment to them, we try to think that, well, that does not have any ultimate existence. And if it does not have any ultimate existence, it's transitory. And the philosophical definition of what is real, or of what is real, is whatever is transitory is unreal. Just as in our own lives, we live for a particular length of time, we are born, we die, but then our body becomes non-existent. So is our body real or unreal? It appears real to us as we live, but then at some point, as we realize the transitoriness of everything, then we start to think a little more deeply, well, if we start thinking that all these other objects cannot be real because they also have transitory existence, then what about this body? What about this mind? Even our mind goes through many changes, and then you wonder, well, what is real in our mind? So we go through this whole process of discriminating between what is real and what is unreal about ourselves, until we come to what can no longer be, that part of us we can no longer deny, and that we call the soul. But even beyond that, with more discrimination, more spiritual experience, we realize that only God exists. We have no existence. Because the moment we think of God, we melt into that and we lose that sense of individual existence. So our small little ego becomes part of that cosmic ego. And at that point, there's no further discrimination can take place, no further renunciation. All that exists is God. And then, so all you can say is that only God can be real. But we have to experience that. That's all I've described as an intellectual understanding of that. The full intent, the full experience of that won't come until we have that experience. So he continues, first of all, set up God in the shrine of your heart, and then deliver lectures as much as you like. How will the mere repetition of Brahma profit you if you are not imbued with discrimination and dispassion? It is the empty sound of a conch shell. So he's speaking to the sannyasis that have arrived and are visiting. And I'm guessing that they also give teachings and talks to the public. But I'm understanding here that he's perceiving that they are not sincere, or they do not have complete discrimination and renunciation. And so he's saying, well, what kind of teachings are you giving if you don't have complete renunciation and discrimination? So he's just reminding them that you need those spiritual, you need to have that as part of your spiritual discipline to be able to even be qualified to speak about God. And then he tells a story. There lived in a village a young man named Padmalochan. People used to call him Podo for short. In this village there was a temple in a very dilapidated condition. It contained no image of God. Ashwatha and other plants sprang up in the ruins of its walls. Bats lived inside, and the floor was covered with dust and the droppings of the bats. The people of the village had stopped visiting the temple. One day after dusk, the villagers heard the sound of a conch shell from the direction of the temple. They thought perhaps someone had installed an image in the shrine and was performing the evening worship. One of them softly opened the door and saw Padmalochan standing in a corner blowing the conch. No image had been set up. The temple hadn't been swept or washed. The filth and dirt lay everywhere. Then he shouted to Podo, "You have set up no image here within the shrine, O fool. Blowing the conch, you simply make confusion worse confounded. Day and night, 11 bats scream there incessantly." So here we have, when we worship God, if you haven't installed an image, because we need an image in order to be able to connect emotionally toward God. In other words, there has to be some attitude that we have toward God, an image that represents that attitude that we want to have. So if it's almost like, well, you can go to any room, think of nothing, and you're just playing with a conch shell. You have no attitude of anything. He's just there. He just happens to be in the empty building that used to be a temple. But he's making all the sounds that one might make to indicate that you are making worship to the image. And so the villagers associated that sound with, oh, finally an image is there. Finally God is being worshipped there. So this is just a story to illustrate that if you don't have discrimination and dispassion, renunciation, already part of your character, but yet you're talking about these things, then your words are empty words. So this is there's no worship going on. It's an empty worship, just making loud sounds. It's no different than saying, well, he's just blowing a lot of hot air. There's no meaning in his words, but he's using all these words. Nobody understands what those words mean or even what he's trying to say, but like political words, politicians or anyone making a big sales pitch. So I will stop there for today. And if there are any questions, I will welcome them. There are no questions from the audience here and no questions online. So I'll conclude with a chant. Om Niranjanam Nityam Anantarupam Bhakta Nukampa Dritavigraham Vai Ishavataram Paramesamityam Tvam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namamaha. We salute that Ramakrishna who is without blemish, eternal and infinite in forms, who has assumed human form out of compassion for the devotees, who is God incarnate, the Supreme Lord, and who is most worshipful. Om, peace, peace, peace to all beings. Before we leave, let's conclude with a few announcements. This Friday evening at 7 p.m., Swami Nikhilananda will continue with the householder disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. We are presently speaking about Girish Ghosh. So part 7 will be this Friday evening, both in person and streamed online. This Saturday, we also have at the retreat a Karma Yoga Day. So that is open to everyone to do some volunteer work at the retreat, and a brief introduction to Karma Yoga before the volunteer work begins. That will begin at 10 a.m. Directions will be on our website, to the top of On Retreat. And also pretty soon is a birthday celebration for Swami Nikhilananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. And in honor of that, of his birthday, Swami Satchidananda will speak on him this Sunday at 10 a.m. here in the chapel and also streamed online. So again, thank you very much all for attending in person and online. Okay, good night.